Hi guys, Anthony and Bob Barker are back, and today we have a very important project. So unfortunately, recently my uncle passed, and my mother asked me to make a box for his ashes. So today we're going to kind of go over the steps that we did to make this box. So let's get into it.
Now, of course, boxes like this can serve really so many different purposes, not just the one that we're using it for. And that's why I decided just to go ahead and make this video, because it's a good foundational project, just kind of help with your overall woodworking skills. So we started off with a piece of walnut, and it was a little thick because this is actually the same piece that I used for the sign that I made for the shop. So we had to plane it down to get it a little bit thinner for the size that we're looking for here. And so for this one, I have a hard time not getting a little bit of snipe on the ends of this thing. So whenever I use this planer, I tend to just leave a little extra length on the board. That way I can just cut off that part and I don't really have to worry about it. So we just kept on running it through until we got like a decent size. And then just squaring up the edges here on the table saw. Now the piece did already have one straight edge, so we just really had to do the other one. I ended up doing both of them really just to kind of clean it up a little bit. Then we brought it over to our crosscut sled and cut it up into the different pieces that we needed. And of course I did forget to video that part of it, but you know the process. Basically we're just cutting down the four sides of the box that we need. And then we're gonna take our blade here and we're gonna move it over to 45 degrees for the next cut. Now this cut would be much better to do with a miter gauge, but I don't have one, so I ended up just doing it this way. And I was comfortable with this cut, but always just keeping in mind safety when you're doing these things. This may not be the best way to do it, but given the size of these pieces, I felt like it was an okay way to go for me. So once we got the 45-degree cuts on each side of all four pieces, I took it over to the router table, and we're cutting a rabbet on the bottom edge of this, and that's basically going to hold the bottom of the box. And the reason why I'm doing it now is because, you know, I can do this cut later on, but then I'd have to chisel out the edges. Doing it early just kind of keeps it nice and clean, so it makes it a smoother process. So I laid it out the way we wanted it, and then just used some painter's tape just to kind of keep these edges nice and together. And do keep in mind, like when you're doing like a project like this with the cuts, you want to try to get as continuous grain as possible, you know, around the edges. So just kind of plan ahead of time when you're doing your cuts and putting this together. So then we throw glue into all of these joints, and you'll probably notice that I missed putting the glue on both of the side edges there, which I don't really notice until I'm doing the test fit. So after I put it together, I was getting ready to put the tape on there, and then I realized that that one didn't have any glue, so I went back and did that one too. So after we have glue in all of the joints, we can go ahead and put the tape to kind of keep this piece shut. And then I got this clamp here, just a strap clamp, just to keep it nice and together and square. Then I realized it's kind of a little tall just for one, so I ended up using just some of my other clamps just to add some extra strength around these joints, and it still came out pretty well. So after it was all dried up, we got it out of the clamps, and now we can work on the bottom piece. So for both the top and the bottom, we're going to be doing just regular maple, and my miter saw is not big enough to cut it in one go, so basically I just kind of flipped it around. I don't have to be exact on this one because we're going to be cutting it down to size. And also I needed to thin this piece out to fit into that rabbet joint that we made. So just like before, we're just going to keep on running it through, shaving off a little at a time until we get to our desired thickness. Then we just do a little bit of sanding. Figured it was going to be much easier to do it now than after I put it into the box. And then we bring it over to our crosscut sled, and I'm basically just kind of measuring straight off the box to get it to its final dimension. I figured that was much easier to do that than to actually try to measure it and get it to size that way. And then while I was doing that, I did just kind of make sure to sneak up onto my cuts to make sure I get as nice and snug as a fit as we can. And then after we did that, we cut out another piece of the maple, and now we're going to be working on the top. So here I'm just getting it kind of squared up and roughly to size, and we're going to use some double-sided tape to put it temporarily on the box. So next up, I took it over to the router table and just did the flush trimmed it to get this exactly to the size of the box. However, I wish I would have did one extra step before this because I put another block of wood on the underneath the lid to hold it snug on inside the box, and it would have been easier to have done that before I got it to a final size, but either way we'll make it work. Then we brought it back to the table saw, and I angled my blade just slightly. I can't remember the exact degree, but I just kind of played with it until I got the depth that I was looking for, and then I worked with my fence just to kind of create the shape that I wanted, and I run it through all four sides to get a little extra shape on that top until we got it where we wanted it. Then kind of sanded it smooth so we can make sure it really was what we're looking for. And with my sander, I didn't want to get too aggressive and lose the angles from the cuts, so I did some extra hand sanding as well. And now this is the piece I was talking about that's going to be underneath the top, and so I added a little chamfer on the bottom edge, and that way it just slides easier into the box when you're actually closing the lid. So with that cut out, I taped the lid on into place, that way it doesn't move. And I use a little super glue as well as regular wood glue, and I just dropped this in from beneath and sealed it onto the top. And since that piece is a pretty tight fit within the box, just the friction is going to keep that top on and it shouldn't fall off. And this is what the lid looks like at this point. So I was liking the way it was coming out, but I wanted something a little extra just to tie that maple from the top and the bottom into the body of the box. So we're going to be putting in some splines for some decorative detail, and of course it does help reinforce those miter joints. So here I'm just putting in a different blade with a flat top. That way when we do the splines, it's going to be a nice clean cut. And I made this jig, I basically just copied Michael Alm. I do have footage of it, so if anybody's interested in like the full build, I just let me know below, and I can actually make that as well. So I just did a little test piece, and then I cut off the little pieces of wood here of the maple that I'm going to be using for the splines. And I just kind of a little bit of a trial and error. What I really should have just did is set a stop block to make it easier for myself, but it didn't. And then I set the distance that I was looking for on my fence there and just ran the jig through to cut the splines. And you can see there is the first one. And basically, I'm going to be doing 2 splines on each side. So I'm just going to run it through all 4 corners on the top, and then I just flip it over to the other side and all 4 on the bottom, and keeping my fence at the same spot. That way the spacing from the top to the spline and from the bottom to a spline is going to be totally even. Now there's definitely ways to do this without making the jig, but I figure it's just going to make it so much faster when I end up doing a project like this in the future, because I'm sure I will at some point, so I might as well just get the jig and make it nicer for myself later. And here you can see all the cuts ready to go for the splines. Now it wasn't as exact as I wanted to be with the actual splines, so I just rigged up a little sanding block there and just kind of rubbed it on there. Enough just to get them to a nice decent snug fit, and I put one in each corner and I kind of marked exactly which one I wanted where. It was probably unnecessary, but I got a little OCD with that part. And so now it's time to insert them. So I'm basically just smearing some wood glue on both sides of the spline, smash it into place and make sure you get a nice tight fit, and then wipe off all the excess. And then we're just going to go ahead and repeat that process for all 8 of the splines all the way around the corners. And while those are drying up, it's time to put in the bottom. And so for this one, we're just going to use that rabbit joint that we made earlier, smear some glue all in there, and just trying to be careful so I don't get too much squeeze out. And then we can put our piece of maple into place, and then we can grab a whole bunch of clamps and just kind of put those all around, some good even pressure. And this goes to show no matter how many clamps you have, you always need more. Now, like I said, this is just for a hobby, so I don't have as much as many do, but even for me, always need more clamps. So after that was all dried up, it's time just to cut off the spline. So I just got a flush trim pull saw here and just kind of slowly went at it, being careful not to kind of snap off those edges, because I didn't want to create any little extra divots in there. And so I did it the hard way for a little bit here at first, kind of like having the box move around on me until I realized that I probably should just kind of clamp it down, and that would make it much easier to cut them. So eventually I figured that out, and it made the process go a lot smoother. At this point, we're getting into the home stretch, and I'm quite pleased with how this is turning out. There's one issue that I didn't take into account with these splines is there was some color variation within the maple itself. So as we're sanding it down here, it looks very distinctive, and they're very easy to see within the wood here. But there's a little bit of darkening coloration that you're going to notice that makes them not quite. It doesn't pop as much when I put the finish on it. But in the end, I still think it ended up working. So we made sure we got a good sanding surface on everything. Then we went back and cleaned it all off, wiped it down with some mineral spirits, and then with a tack cloth to make sure there's nothing left on there. And we're going to be using some Rubio Monocoat Pure. And we're just basically kind of smearing all of that in and rubbing it in with our white Scotch-Brite pad. And as we're going, you can see on that bottom left one that some of these splines, they have a little bit of a dark coloration into it. So at certain angles, they pop out really nice, but other angles, they actually get a little dark. But in the end, I think it still looks pretty good. So making sure to get both the inside and the outside finished here, and then we can move on to the top, and we're using the same finish with this as well. So after we got it on to all of the edges there, we let it sit for a little bit. Then we came back with some clean rags and just wiped off all the excess. And then here's the finished box. Now, when I was choosing this maple, I did choose one with extra coloration in it, particularly for the top piece. And I did this because I know that kind of goes with the style that both my uncle and my mother like. And I wanted to incorporate their style into this build.
All right, so that's the project. I'm very pleased with how it came out. I think it's going to serve its function very well. But of course, projects like this, it doesn't have to be for the same purpose as ours. You can make boxes of this or different sizes for so many different things. And overall, I think it's a good project to just kind of build your fundamental skills and improve your projects in the future. So if you like what we're doing, give us a like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff. Otherwise, we'll see you guys in the next one.